Joining me now is Maher Mazahi. He is an Africa football journalist based in Marseille. Welcome to DW News Africa. Now, Morocco were the underdogs and they've broken through a major glass ceiling. How has their story inspired many around the world, especially in Africa?
Yeah, well, Morocco are at a perfect cross-section between, the African continent, the Arab world, but also a lot of the Muslim world was inspired by what they saw on the pitch. So on the African continent and the Arab world, we've never had a team make it to the semifinals. So in that sense, it was unprecedented, it was historic, but also from a representation standpoint, from a symbolism standpoint, we had people relating to the Moroccan national team from places like Indonesia, Pakistan, Muslims all around the world, even North America, South America, saw things like, the players prostrating after they scored a goal, or seeing them celebrate with their mothers that are wearing the hijab. So just symbolically, that representation, I think, is what made all these neutrals support the Moroccan national team.
And what stood in the way, do you think, for the African teams from winning a World Cup in past years?
Yeah, I mean, this is the 92nd year of the World Cup, and we finally have an African team in the semifinals. But what I can tell you is that for the first 40 years, Africa didn't even have one guaranteed place at the World Cup. And that's because FIFA, didn't think they were worthy enough. And Africa actually had to boycott the 1966 World Cup to ensure that they at least have one guaranteed slot. We didn't have 5 teams until 1998. And even now, we believe that we're underrepresented. When you see Europe has around a little more than 50 nations and they have 13 places, Africa has 54 nations and we only have 5 places. And that's one of the positives that's going to be going forward into the 2026 World Cup, is that Africa is going to have 9.5 places. And I think that's going to include more and more positive results for the African continent.
Yeah, one of your articles does conclude that a lot of this did start off with colonization on the continent. Could you expand on that?
Well, quite simply put, the 90% of the continent was colonized when World Cups began being played from 1930s, when the very first World Cup was. Most African nations didn't really gain their independence until the late 1950s, early 1960s. So for the first 30 years, when a lot of countries like Uruguay, like Italy, were winning World Cups, even Brazil, Africa wasn't even playing. So that's when we talk about historically, and we talk about, Africa hasn't been here for 92 years. That's quite simply because we haven't been represented at the World Cup for, just the last few decades.
Now, Morocco's coach has been widely seen as the architect of the success of the Atlas Lions. What has he been doing differently?
Morocco's previous coach, Vahid Halilodzic, who's a very good coach, he's Bosnian, but he was much more of an authoritarian. So if a player, didn't do exactly what he wanted, he would discard them from the group, no matter their star status. And we saw that with Chelsea midfielder Hakim Ziyech. Walid Regragui came in not even 100 days into the job, but we saw that he's less of an authoritarian and more of a guy that's going to put his arm around your shoulder, show you a lot of love, and hope you reciprocate it back. And I think that kind of spirit, that familial, warm spirit, is what we saw in this Moroccan team, not just from the players, but from their families, from the coaches. Everybody was united. And the fact that, so many of these players, 14 out of the 26 in the Moroccan squad, were born abroad. The Federation's former national technical director told me that it's like having different spices. If you have one spice in a dish, it's bland. But if you have different spices, all these players bringing their cultural baggage, setting that aside, coming together for a singular cause, that kind of unity also helps a lot too.
And when you're looking at Morocco as a country and the way in which the government has been investing in perhaps maybe the team, what has Morocco done right in preparing for this tournament?
Well, they've invested very heavily in infrastructure, and that's for a few different reasons. South Africa hosted the first African World Cup in 2010, but Morocco really wanted to. It was a runoff between those two countries, and Morocco have bid for a World Cup on 5 different occasions, and they failed every single time. But they do have credible bids submitted in the past. So they have the stadiums, they have the hotel infrastructure. They very easily can get to Morocco from anywhere in the world, Europe, North America, from Asia. And so that infrastructure has been built for a while, but what they've recently done, and they've accelerated it, is that they invested in something called the Mohammed VI Complex and Mohammed VI Academy. And they spent more than $65 million on those two things. And the Academy has produced players, including 3 starters for the Moroccan national team at this World Cup. And the complex has things like cryotherapy chambers, hotels, 8 perfectly manicured pitches. And what that does is it really it gives the Moroccan national team a professional setting where they can serenely prepare for things like the World Cup. And I think that's made a big difference in their World Cup participation.
So does this put Morocco on the map to host a future tournament, would you say?
That's the big hope. I mean, there's one problem is that FIFA is going to expand this World Cup. And I said that's a positive for Africa and that we're going to have more slots. But it can also be a negative for countries that want to host the World Cup by themselves. You know, Morocco could host a World Cup with 32 teams. But now that we're going to have 48 teams, you're going to need more stadiums. It might be difficult for Morocco to host that all alone. So how can Morocco host the next World Cup? I mean, there are very significant political obstacles in the way, but people think or dream of a Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, perhaps even Egypt, some kind of North African World Cup. I think they have the footballing culture, they have the facilities. They just need to get over some political obstacles, and that would be a great World Cup bid.
Mm-hmm. And just going back to the Moroccan players who were praying on the pitch, how much do you think faith has played a role in their journey here?
That's something that's not yet been very deeply studied, I think, in sports psychology. We see this, during Ramadan. Players like in basketball, in the NBA, Hakeem Olajuwon, he's had some of his best months playing basketball when he was fasting. We saw Mesut Ozil say that fasting really helped him when he was playing football as well. And so we see sometimes when players harness their faith and they really believe that their faith is helping them, then there's a placebo effect that sort of happens and players actually perform better on the pitch, even if they're depriving themselves of essential nutrients. So it really is a mind over matter situation. So faith will help you if you believe that faith is helping you, if that makes any sense. If you're just doing it performatively, then there's psychologists say that there's not much of a difference in any case.
Sure. And what do you think it would take now for an African team to win the World Cup?
Well, I don't think we're too far away this time. I mean, we're 180 minutes, 2 matches away from lifting the trophy. What Morocco's qualification to the semifinals does is it removes an inhibition, in our minds, and it removes a mental block, because it's all well and good knowing that an African team can theoretically win a World Cup, but it's another thing seeing it with your own eyes. And so I think what African teams will have seen from this Moroccan participation is that, number one, unified fronts, whether it's from supporters, family, players, that's very, very important. Those intangibles can make differences on the pitch. Number two, defensive football tends to work in tournaments because you can draw all 3 of your group stage matches, make it to the knockout stages, and if you have a good goalkeeper, you can win in penalty shootouts as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more defensive sides when we talk about smaller footballing nations, set up that low defensive block, hit them on counterattacks and set pieces as Morocco did, and that can help you not only in the group stages, but also in the knockout stages. So I think those are the kinds of things that African nations are seeing and perhaps could inspire them in future World Cups.
Maher Mazahi, Africa football journalist in Marseille. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Raheela.